South Korean exports keep shrinking amid global economic slowdown, posting a decline for 5 straight months. This is due mainly to weak global demand for semiconductors, Korea's key export item, and a sharp drop in shipments to China. But the Korean government is aiming high this year despite export projections of a major decline. Will we witness export conditions improve towards a year end? For some clues, we now connect with Professor Yang Jun-sok at the Catholic University of Korea. Good morning, Professor Yang.
Good morning.
So let's talk about these export numbers. The Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry analyzes that if chip exports fall 10%, Korea's economic growth will drop over 0.6 percentage points. I do wonder if that gauge is accurate. And this is all because, unfortunately, recent figures suggest Korea is headed towards this very direction. Why are we continuing to see weak global demands for semiconductors?
Okay, as to how much Korean growth is dependent on the exports of semiconductors. Well, semiconductors account for about 25% of Korea's exports, so any changes there will have major consequences for Korea's exports, which in turn has effect on Korea's growth rate. And it is the single largest item that Korea exports and also makes. So it does have perhaps very outstandingly big footprint on the Korean economy. Now, as for the why the semiconductor sales are weak, well, the first big reason is global economic slowdown. IMF estimates that the growth for this year will be only 2.9%, and it's slowing down demand for everything, especially for countries other than the United States. The second reason is post-pandemic demand shift. What this means is that during the pandemic, because we couldn't meet each other face-to-face, the demand for services went down, but instead demand for IT products went up because everybody needed a computer to work from home or talk to each other over internet. But now, because of the pandemic is over, people are now meeting each other again. Services demand has gone up, and people's desire for IT products is down. That's not only affecting IT products, but investment in IT-related services, especially something like servers. So that's driving the demand down also. And then third, high interest rates, that's making big tech less willing to invest, and that also drives down the demand for semiconductors. Fourth, consumer hoarding. A lot of semiconductor users, because they thought that it would be continually difficult to get semiconductors, they had bought perhaps an extra amount during the time of the lockdown. And then, of course, there's China shutdown and lockdown. But the concern here is that Chinese lockdown is now over, but still the Korean exports, especially Korean exports in semiconductors, have not picked up due to all the reasons that we've talked about earlier. But it's not just Korea, it's just all semiconductor companies. According to Semiconductor Industry Association, which includes 99% of U.S. firms and 2/3 of global firms, sales for January 2023, which is the latest numbers that they have, chip sales are down 5.2% compared to December 2022 and 18.5% compared to January 2022.
So it does seem like the global economic slowdown and pandemic-induced record sales and of course, even the consumer hoarding you mentioned, these are fundamental differences perhaps shared not just by South Korea, but different semiconductor makers. I know you don't have a crystal ball, Dr. Yang, and we're best guessed as an educated one. When would we start to see signs of a rebound in chip exports, and what are the biggest obstacles down the road, in your opinion?
Okay, well, for the first half of the year, virtually everyone agrees that global semiconductor market will be lackluster. We knew this going in. What they're pinning their hopes on is the second half of the year, because there's going to be faster server chips that are that will be placed on sale during the second half of the year, and people are hoping that that will spark investment not only in these new server chips, but in order to have new servers, you need to have higher speed memory. So they're hoping that the semiconductor market will be picking up in the second half of the year. Now, it's not clear, though, whether these type of investment will take place. There will be new chips out, but because of the high interest rates, the technology companies may forego investment in these new chips and new servers until further in the future.
Okay, so in that regard, lowered interest rates, that might be a motive for these tech companies to begin new investments. Dr. Yang, you mentioned that, of course, in China, they lifted those stringent lockdown measures, yet demand is not rising. Falling exports to China is a major factor dragging down Korea's export volume, so it's important for us. We saw the largest trade deficit with China on record in the month of January this year, and the deficit continued for the fifth consecutive month in the month of February. In your opinion, what's behind the slumping exports to the world's second largest economy?
Well, note that majority of exports that are going to China from Korea are intermediate parts and not consumption goods for Chinese consumers. So Korean export to China depends substantially on China's exports to the world, and vice versa. Korea actually imports a lot of intermediate parts from China, so China's exports to Korea also depend on Korean exports to the world. But there's a mixture of reasons why Korean exports to China is falling down. There is a long-term trend. Long-term trend is that Korea's exports to China will fall, and that's because technology-wise, China is catching up with Korea, so China is replacing Korean intermediate goods with Chinese-produced intermediate goods. On the other hand, Korea is becoming more dependent on Chinese intermediate parts. So part of the reason for the trade deficit with China will be that this follows the long-term trend of Korea importing more from China and China importing less from Korea, at least in terms of intermediate parts. But that is not the whole picture. This long-term trend is not yet big enough to turn the entire Korea exports to China into a deficit. The shorter-term reason, which is probably having a bigger effect, is that Chinese growth rate is fairly low. China expected growth rate this year is less than 5%. China's exports are down because of the global economic slowdown. So they're exporting less, and I just explained that means Korea exports less to China. So those factors are probably slowing down the China's imports of Korean goods.
Just the fact that China's exports numbers being down, would you not single-handedly blame the U.S.-China trade war on that, or is it not contingent on that either?
The U.S.-China trade war is playing a small part, but the U.S. had a record trade deficit last year, and U.S.-China trade deficit is up, not necessarily toward the highest levels, but it has returned to pre-pandemic levels. So the U.S.-China trade war is having some effect, but it's not enough to turn the U.S. trade deficit with China around a great deal.
South Korea's government has set the country's export target at $685 billion for this year, which is slightly higher than last year's total. Economists project over a 4% decline in export volume. In your opinion, how realistic is this goal, and what more should be done to reach that number? And perhaps looking further down the line, could diversification of key export items be one of the solutions?
Okay, well, the government's goal, I think, is very, very optimistic. It's not likely to become real. That's because exports are likely to fall this year, even if the global economy was fairly healthy. Remember that last year we had the highest export value in Korean history, and that's not only because of high volume of sales, volume of exports, but high prices. Remember, I had a very high period of very high inflation, and that actually applied for Korean exports as much as Korean imports, especially for Korean export items like petroleum products and petrochemicals. This year, not only is the volume of exports falling, but also prices. The volume of exports fell in January and February compared to last year. And in addition, we have falling prices. So combination of that two means that there will be a large decrease in value of exports. And actually, imports will probably fall because of that reason as well. Because of the double hit, both from volume and prices, it is very likely that Korea export value performance this year will be rather lackluster. I was hoping that perhaps price will fall, but not volume, but at least for the first 2 months of the year, volume and prices both seem to have fallen. Now, will diversification of goods and diversification of export destination, can they help? Well, problem is both these diversification is very, very difficult. Diversification of goods is partially happening right now, even though semiconductors remain the biggest export items for Korea. The proportion taken by electric vehicle batteries and other items, automobiles especially, are doing actually fairly well, but in order to keep on diversifying exports into other type of goods than semiconductors, Korea does need to have better R&D and, more importantly, better regulatory and legal environment to commercialize these products from R&D into goods that Korea can sell. Korea has been fairly weak in doing that. And then diversification of export destination. Well, the countries usually export to the largest economies and economies which are close to their own country, which explains why Korea's two biggest trading partners are United States and China. So we'll probably U.S. and China will probably remain Korea's largest export destinations. If we can go more to other places, that's fine. We're doing that with Vietnam, but it's very unlikely that their volume will match U.S. and China because U.S. and China is just too big in terms of economic size.
Just looking at the sheer market size, and also, as you mentioned, geography, it makes sense that they would still remain largely Korea's biggest trading partners. Thank you very much, Professor Yang, as always, for an insightful conversation. We'll speak to you again next week.
Thank you.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.